The first night on Ridgepoint Outpost was the kind of darkness that felt alive, a suffocating black curtain stretching across the mountains, swallowing even the moonlight. And for the new arrivals of Company Delta, it was not the sort of darkness one could sleep through. Not after hearing the stories whispered by the veterans who had manned a ridge before them. Stories of shapes moving on the tree, of footsteps on gravel when no patrol was scheduled, of voices calling from the fog there. Belonged to no man alive. Lieutenant Harrow, a hardened soldier with lines carved deeply around his eyes, stood silently as the fresh recruits settled into their posts, their nervous glances betraying their attempts to look fearless. He had once been just like them, but after 3 months on Ridgepoint, he had learned that fear was not weakness, it was survival. The ridge overlooked a narrow valley covered in dead spruce and skeletal pines, an abandoned no-man's land from the last conflict. But strange occurrences had begun once the enemy retreated, and while command dismissed it as paranoia, the soldiers knew better. They felt it in their bones, a pressure in the air that thickened as night approached. Private Lorne, barely 20, sat with his rifle across his chest, scanning the valley with eyes that burned from exhaustion yet refused to close, because in this place sleep felt dangerous, almost forbidden, as though the moment one drifted off something unseen would seize the opportunity to crawl out of shadows. Around midnight, a chilling gust swept up the ridge with the faint scent of sulfur and wet soil, and though the night was silent, Lorne suddenly felt watched, violently watched, as though dozens of eyes were peering up from the trees. He swallowed hard, gripping his rifle tighter, fingers trembling not from cold, but from the primal instinct screaming inside him. Harrow paced behind the line of watchmen, his boots crunching over loose rock, and whispered in a low, controlled voice, "If you feel scared, good. It means you're paying attention." The men exchanged looks, unsure whether that was supposed to comfort them. A distant crack echoed from the valley, not the sharp crack of a rifle, but something more organic, like bones snapping under immense weight. And instantly, every soldier froze, their breath held, their hearts hammering beneath their uniforms. The radio hissed with static, then went silent. A fog began creeping along the tree-line below, too thick and too fast to be natural, rolling upward like a living thing. The shadows between the trees stretched, elongated, twisted unnaturally, as if they were bending in recognition of the soldiers watching from above. Several men stepped back involuntarily. Lorne whispered, "Sir, what is that?" Harrow did not answer immediately, his eyes narrowing with the expression of a man who had seen this before and feared it deeply. Finally he murmured, almost to himself, "It's earlier than usual tonight." The fog thickened until it swallowed the lower valley entirely, and then, faintly from somewhere inside that suffocating blanket of white, came a sound so unnatural it paralyzed every man on the ridge. Something between a human cry and an animal's wail, stretched impossibly long, filled with agony and hunger all at once. Every soldier clutched their weapons, but none dared fire, for none of them could see the source. All they could do was listen as the cry echoed through the valley like a warning. The darkness pressed closer, the wind died, and every man on watch understood, without needing to be told, why no one ever had trouble staying awake on Ridgepoint Outpost. They were terrified into vigilance. The fog continued to swell upward until it smothered half the ridge in a sickly white haze, muffling sound, distorting distance, and turning every shadow into a potential threat, forcing the men of Company Delta to cluster closer together around their watch positions, as though proximity alone could keep the terror at bay. And Private Lorne, his heartbeat kicking like a drum inside his ribs, felt an instinctive certainty that the thing he'd heard screaming from the valley was not moving away, but climbing steadily toward him. He could feel the vibrations in the earth beneath his boots, faint but unmistakable, almost like a pulsing rhythm sinking itself in his blood. Lieutenant Harrow raised a clenched fist, signaling absolute silence, and the men complied instantly, swallowing every anxious breath as the ridge seemed to hold itself still in anticipation. The fog reached the first line of sandbags and curled around them like grasping fingers, and that's when the whispering began. Not like ordinary speech, but a layered chorus of voices overlapping each other. Some high-pitched, some guttural, some barely audible, all speaking in a language no one recognized, yet somehow understood instinctively as a warning or a lure, or perhaps both. Lorne felt the hair rise on the back of his neck as one whisper slithered directly into his ear, close enough that he jerked his head around expecting to see someone beside him. But no one was there. The nearest soldier was several feet away, standing rigid, eyes wide, clearly hearing something as well. Harrow's voice was low but firm as he said, "Hold your ground. Do not engage until visual confirmation." He gripped his rifle so tightly his knuckles glowed white, betraying the fear he tried so desperately to keep hidden from his men. Suddenly, a figure emerged in the fog below, tall, humanoid, but wrong in ways the soldiers could not articulate. Its arms were too long, its posture unnatural, its movements jerky as though its limbs were being puppeted by invisible strings. It stopped, tilted its head toward the ridge, and the whispering intensified. Hundreds of overlapping voices now, some sobbing, some laughing, some chanting in a rhythmic pattern that made Lorne's stomach churn. Private Mayor Shaw, a large man with a usually unshakable demeanor, raised his weapon despite Harrow's order, whispered, "Sir, sir, that thing is staring at us." Harrow didn't respond. He simply watched, expression cold, almost resigned. Then another figure appeared behind the first, and then another, and another, an entire procession materializing from within a shifting fog, not walking but gliding, their feet barely disturbing the ground, their shapes flickering at the edges as though they were not entirely solid. The fog thickened again, swallowing half the forms, revealing only glimpses, elongated limbs, hollow eye sockets, skin stretched too tightly over sharp bones, silhouettes bending in unnatural angles. Private Holt let out a shaky breath that sounded more like a whimper. "Sir, permission to fall back, please." But Harrow shook his head. "If we fall back, we lose line of sight. And once we lose sight of them," he didn't finish the sentence because everyone already understood. Lorne could feel the whispers clawing at his mind, urging him to step down from the ridge, to walk into the fog, to follow the voices that now sounded eerily like people he once knew. His mother, his younger sister, even the laughter of a childhood friend long dead. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to shut out the hallucination, but the voices only grew clearer, more intimate, more persuasive. Then the first figure let out a shuddering, distorted cry and began to ascend the ridge at terrifying speed, its limbs contorting as it climbed. Harrow called out, "Ready weapons," and dozens of rifles snapped up in perfect synchronization. But just as the men prepared to fire, the figure stopped abruptly only meters away and dissolved into a swirling column of fog, leaving nothing behind but a low hum that reverberated in their bones. The other shapes retreated deeper into the valley fog, vanishing like phantoms as a harsh wind suddenly swept across the ridge, scattering the whispers in the silence. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed, and then Harrow exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging, and spoke in a grim voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever that was, he was scouting us, and it'll be back." The men exchanged haunted looks, realizing the truth. This wasn't a random encounter. They were being observed, tested, measured, and the night was far from over. Dawn never truly broke on Ridgepoint Outpost the next morning. Instead, a dim gray light filtered weakly through the thick, overcast sky, as if the sun itself feared illuminating the valley below. And the men of Company Delta, gaunt, sleepless, and shaken, gathered around the command tent where Lieutenant Harrow silently studied a battered field map, his jaw clenched tight as he traced the narrow valley with a finger that trembled almost imperceptibly. Nobody spoke of the whispering or the impossible shapes from the previous night, not because they doubted what they saw, but because describing it out loud made it too real, too tangible, like inviting something monstrous to step fully into their world. Private Lorne sat on an ammo crate, rubbing his temples while trying to silence the phantom echoes still lingering in his head, faint whispers that came and went like breaths of cold air behind him. He didn't know whether they were memories or remnants of whatever intelligence had probed their minds. The morning patrol, Sergeant Weller and 3 others, ventured down the slope to inspect the tree limb, each man gripping his rifle with a tension that suggested he expected something to seize him from the shadows at any moment. Lauren watched them disappear into the trees and felt a heavy dread settle in his stomach, a quiet certainty that returning to the valley in daylight did not make it safer. In fact, the valley felt more threatening than the pale light, as if what lurked in it hated the sun and seethed beneath its weak glow. Minutes passed, too many minutes, before the radio crackled violently with a burst of static followed by the ragged, panicked breathing of Sergeant Weller. Command, do you copy? Harold lunged for the receiver. Weller, report. A long, wet scraping sound filled the radio, and then Weller's trembling voice returned. Sir, the trees. Something's wrong with the trees. Harrow ordered them to hold position and immediately gathered a response team. But before he could descend the ridge, Weller screamed. A raw, blood-freezing scream that cut off abruptly, leaving only static hissing in the air like a rattlesnake about to strike. Harrow didn't hesitate. He charged downhill with 6 armed soldiers at his back, and Lauren joined them despite every instinct begging him to stay far from the valley. As they approached the tree limb, a nauseating smell hit them. Rotting wood mixed with something metallic like rusted iron soaked in blood. And then they saw what remained of the patrol. Not bodies, not even recognizable parts, but shredded gear scattered across the forest floor, torn into long strips as if something had dissected them with surgical precision. The trees themselves looked warped, their trunks twisted as though they had turned, bent, or stretched to watch the men approach. Deep claw-like gouges marred the bark, forming spirals, symbols, and patterns that made no logical sense, but radiated a malignant intelligence. Private Holt gagged and stumbled back. Where are the bodies? Where the hell are the bodies? No one answered. The absence of corpses was worse than finding them. As Harrow ordered the men to retreat to the ridge, Lauren felt something shift in the fog farther south, subtle, slow, intentional. He froze, staring into the dim haze until he spotted me. A silhouette, human-sized. It staggered toward them with unsteady steps, and Holt cried, "It's Weller. He's alive." But Harrow barked, "Do not approach." The figure limped closer, revealing a torn uniform, a familiar outline. But its face was obscured by the fog, and something was wrong with the way its arms hung, too loose in the joints, as if detached from the skeleton beneath. "Weller," Harrow called cautiously. The thing jerked its head upward, and the fog cleared just enough for them to see the truth. Its face was not Weller's face at all, but a crude imitation stretched over something else, the features sagging, the eyes hollow pits that reflected no light. And when it opened its mouth, a chorus of mismatched voices spilled out, echoing the screams they heard on the radio. The soldiers fired instinctively, dozens of rounds tearing through the imitation, which collapsed into the soil like decaying fabric before dissolving in smoke that seeped back toward the valley. Harrow stood rigid, trembling with fury and terror. "Whatever's down there," he said hoarsely, "it's learning from us." And as the wind carried a low hum up from the valley, vibrating through the trees like a warning drum, every man on the ridge understood something fundamental had changed overnight. The fog wasn't just observing, it was experimenting. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened into a bruised mixture of violet and ash gray, as though the heavens themselves were warning Ridgepoint outposts that night would bring far more than the horrors of yesterday. And Lieutenant Harrow, now visibly fraying at the edges, assembled the entire company for an emergency defensive briefing, outlining new perimeter tactics that revealed just how desperate he had become. Double watch rotations, overlapping fire lanes, and a strict rule that no man, under any circumstance, was to approach the fog or answer any voice that came from it, no matter how familiar or pleading it sounded. As Harrow spoke, Private Lauren scanned the valley below, noticing how unnaturally still it had become. Even the wind refused to blow through the dead trees, and the fog lay unervingly flat against the ground, as if waiting. When dusk bled across the horizon, a low vibrating hum seeped through the earth, a kind of subterranean heartbeat that pulsed beneath the ridge and rattled the sandbags, and every man grabbed his weapon instinctively. The searchlights were switched on, their beams cutting through the mist like weak knives, but the fog reacted strangely, thickening, swirling, coiling away from the light in slow, almost contemplative motions, like a living organism studying its environment. Harrow muttered, "It knows we're ready," and Lorne felt an icy weight sink into his stomach. The hum deepened, becoming rhythmic, almost mechanical, and then the sound split into layers, high, low, whispering, groaning, all merging into a single sustained drone that made teeth vibrate and vision blur. Men pressed palms against their ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside their skulls, burrowing, scraping, pushing against their thoughts. Private Holt stumbled forward, gasping, "They're pushing into us, into our heads. Don't let them, don't let them," before collapsing to his knees, shaking violently. Harrow yelled to the medics, but before they reached Holt, every light on the ridge flickered, dimmed, and died at once, plunging the outpost into a darkness so absolute it felt like the world had vanished. The hum ceased instantly. The silence that followed was worse. It was a silence so vast and empty that it felt hostile. Lorne's breath grew shallow as he adjusted his night vision scope, but the fog's density overwhelmed it, showing only a formless sea of shifting white. Then came the footsteps, hundreds of them, soft, synchronized, padding across the valley floor and ascending the slope toward the ridge, not rushing, not stumbling, but moving in a calm, deliberate rhythm that suggested intelligence, coordination, purpose. Hold positions. Harrow hissed, though even he could barely keep the tremor out of his voice. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they surrounded the outpost from all sides, circling slowly like predators scenting their prey. Shapes emerged, a dozen, then 24, dark silhouettes barely discernible within the fog, some tall, some small. One shape elongated upward like a shadow stretching beyond the limits of reality, while another crawled on too many limbs, its movements fluid yet disturbingly silent. But worst of all were the human-shaped ones, figures wearing the rough outline of soldiers, their forms flickering like broken reflections in water, as though something was trying to reconstruct the anatomy from memory, but failed. They stopped only a few meters from the outer sandbags, standing completely still, staring, or appearing to stare, at the trembling men on watch. Holt, still shaking on the ground, began to sob uncontrollably. "Please," he whispered, "please don't let them take me." As if responding, one of the human-shaped silhouettes stepped forward, its face warping into an imitation of Holt's own features, eerily accurate, except for the stretched, papery texture and the absence of eyes. It opened its mouth, and Holt's own voice echoed out of it, pleading, terrified, story. Several soldiers screamed and fired instinctively, bullets tearing through the figure. But instead of falling, the silhouette unraveled, splitting into streaks of fog that slithered back in the mass below. The other shapes stepped forward in unison. Harrow shouted, "Light flares!" Now, the sky burst into harsh red and white as dozens of flares launched upward, their glow momentarily slicing through the fog like ripping an open curtain. For a fraction of a second, the soldiers saw everything. Hundreds of pale, contorted faces fused into the fog itself, mouths open in silent screams, their forms half material, half ether, writhing with unnatural hope. The flares burned out. Darkness slammed back, and then the fog surged forward. The fog struck the ridge like a living tidal wave, cold and suffocating, swallowing the first defensive line before the men could even readjust their aim. And Private Lorne felt the world dissolve into a blur of screams, gunfire, and freezing white as dozens of soldiers were ripped from their positions by invisible forces that yanked them into the mist with sickening velocity, their cries cutting off as though their throats were crushed in mid-scream. The air vibrated with a low howl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, pressing against their skulls with such intensity that several men collapsed, clutching their heads, blood streaming from their noses. Lieutenant Harrow dragged Lorne toward the inner barricades, barking orders through the chaos, though even he could barely stay upright with the fog clawing at his legs like icy hands trying to pull him off his feet. "Fall back to the command bunker," Harrow shouted, but his words sounded drowned, as though spoken underwater, the fog devouring sound as greedily as it consumed flesh. Shapes drifted around them, twisting silhouettes that moved with unnatural speed, sometimes phasing into the ground, sometimes stretching vertically like shadows cast by a dying sun. One of them, a massive figure whose torso pulsed like a beating heart, slammed into a machine gunner, and the man's body folded inward as if crushed by invisible pressure before being dragged backward in waves. Lorne fired blindly at a swirling mass near the sandbags, but the bullets passed through without effect, as though the fog itself was mocking their efforts. Through the flashing muzzle bursts, he saw other horrors, faces within the mist screaming silently, elongated hands reaching from the whiteness only to vanish, disembodied voices calling to the soldiers using perfect imitations of their loved ones. Mothers, children, brothers, dead friends. One voice, soft and trembling, whispered Lorne's name from behind him, sounding exactly like his younger sister. He nearly turned, instinctively, but Harrow grabbed his collar and yanked him back. "Do not listen to them," the lieutenant roared, his voice cracking with desperation. As they reached the inner barricade, a horrific cracking sound echoed across the ridge, the outer wall of sandbags splitting apart as something enormous pushed through from below, forcing its way upward like a burrowing beast. The ground shook violently, knocking several men off balance as the earth itself bulged and ruptured, splitting open to reveal a churning pit of fog and writhing, distorted limbs reaching skyward. The pit expanded, swallowing equipment, crates, even entire sections of fortification. Harrow ordered a retreat to the last defensive hold, the concrete bunker embedded into the mountain's rock, while flares were launched again in a desperate attempt to slow the advancing fog. In the flare's red glow, Lorne glimpsed the true form of the thing crawling from the pit, a gargantuan amalgamation of writhing bodies fused by fog, countless faces emerging and sinking back into its surface, every mouth open in an eternal scream, its limbs forming and reforming like clay shaped by invisible fingers. The sight nearly broke him. Many soldiers did break. One dropped his rifle and ran directly into the fog, vanishing instantly, his scream echoing only once before morphing into laughter that didn't belong to him. Another tried to shoot himself, but the fog tore the weapon from his hand. The men fled toward the bunker as the monstrous mass surged forward, rippling across the ground with terrifying speed, its massive head, or what resembled it, turning toward them with hollow, glowing cavities where eyes should have been. Lorne scrambled through the bunker entrance as Harrow fired grenade rounds into the pit creature, explosions rippling through the fog, but slowing it only slightly. "Seal the doors," Harrow shouted as the last surviving soldiers threw themselves inside. Lorne and two others spun the iron wheel, forcing the reinforced steel doors shut just as a thunderous impact slammed against them from the outside, bending the metal inward several inches. Men stumbled backward in terror as another impact shook the bunker. Then another, the fog creature's blows reverberating through the concrete like distant artillery. Lights flickered overhead, dust falling from cracks in the ceiling. Harrow steadied himself and spoke in a low, grim tone that silenced the room. "It wants something. It always has, and now it's done observing. It's feeding." Lorne's pulse hammered in his neck as he listened to the monstrous scraping and thudding from outside, and he understood what Harrow meant. The fog was no longer satisfied with fear or imitation. It hungered for the men themselves, mind, body, soul, and the bunker, their last sanctuary, was already beginning to tremble. Inside the bunker, the air felt thick and metallic, every breath tasting of concrete dust and fear as the surviving soldiers huddled beneath the flickering emergency lights, listening to the relentless pounding outside, each impact sending fine tremors through the walls and floor, as though the mountain itself was groaning under the assault of whatever monstrosity clawed at the steel doors. Private Lorne pressed his back against the crate of mortar shells, his trembling fingers wrapped around his rifle, though deep down he knew that weapon, any weapon, meant nothing against the fog's impossible strength, but clinging to it helped him feel human in a place where the world no longer behaved like it meant. Lieutenant Harrow strode to the central table where the map of the valley lay crumpled beneath the lantern light, his shadow twitching and stretching across the bunker walls with every flicker of the bulbs, and his voice cracked as he said, "This was never a patrol zone, never a defensive checkpoint. They built Ridge Point on top of something they didn't understand. And now it's awake." No one responded. Their silence was not disbelief, but dread-filled acceptance. A violent spasm rocked the bunker as something massive slammed against the outer reinforcement beams, and dust rained from above in thick clouds. Private Holt let out a sob, covering his ears, whispering, "Make it stop, please make it stop." But the bunker itself seemed to echo his terror, grinding, trembling, creaking as though squeezed by invisible pressure. The fog voices seeped through the cracks, crawling across the ceiling like ghostly vibrations, whispering in a dozen familiar tones that bent and twisted into pleading, taunting, threatening words. Lorne heard his commander's voice mimicked perfectly, "Stand down, soldier," but coming from the vents, warped and distant, and he fought the urge to scream. Harrow barked orders to stabilize the power link to the backup generator. But as two engineers rushed to comply, a deafening metallic screech tore through the bunker. The steel doors were bending inward, warping like soft clay under the weight of hundreds of pounding wheels. The soldiers raised their weapons, forming defensive lines, but the doors convulsed again, and this time a jagged tear ripped across the center, thin tendrils of fog snaking through like protesting fingers. Harrow shouted, "Fall back to the inner chamber," and men scrambled, tripping over crates, dragging wounded comrades as the fog pushed harder. The tear widened until a claw-like appendage. No bone, no flesh, only twisting pale vapor solidifying in the hooked angles, pierced through, slashing the air. Holt panicked and fired wildly at the fog tendrils, the shots cracking like desperate fireworks, but the bullets passed uselessly through the shifting rings. The fog responded by wrapping around his legs, dragging him across the floor as he screamed, scraping his nails against concrete in a futile attempt to anchor himself. Harrow lunged forward, grabbing Holt's vest, pulling with every ounce of strength, but the fog yanked harder, ripping Holt from his grasp and pulling him through the widening breach with a sickening pop of suction, his scream swallowed instantly by the white abyss outside. The men faltered, terror freezing them, but Harrow's fury kept him moving. He slammed a detonator into Lorne's chest and growled, "If that thing breaks through the second door, you blow the munitions chamber. We cannot let it take us alive." Lorne stared in horror, realizing Harrow intended to sacrifice the entire outpost. Another blow hammered the outer door, splitting it halfway down, a booming metallic death rattle that sent cables snapping and lights bursting. Darkness swallowed the bunker for 3 heartbeats before the emergency lamps flickered back, painting the room in blood-orange hues. The fog surged again, now pouring through the tear like a waterfall of living smoke, forming half-shaped heads, gaping mouths, stretching arms that reached for the nearest thing. One soldier was lifted into the air, his body bending backward unnaturally as the fog filled his mouth, his eyes turning white before he collapsed in a lifeless heap. Lorne staggered backward, clutching the detonator so tightly his knuckles burned. Harrow grabbed his shoulder, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Listen to me. It's not just feeding, it's expanding. If it gets out of this valley, it won't stop." Another impact thundered against the bunker, the second door groaning under strain. Harrow shoved Lorne toward the inner barricade. "Get ready." Lorne nodded, his throat tight, his heartbeat pounding like artillery fire inside his skull. Outside, something massive roared, an alien, guttural wail filled with hunger and triumph, and the bunker walls bowed inward. Lorne raised the detonator, tears streaking through dirt on his face. The final moment was coming. Ridgepoint was dying, and in the suffocating orange glow, he finally understood that the fog did not want to kill them. It wanted to consume the room. The bunker's final seconds stretched into an eternity of thunderous impacts, collapsing steel, and suffocating white vapor pressing inward like the breath of some ancient, starving god in private lore, clutching the detonator to his chest as if it were the last fragile thread tying him to sanity. Felt his thoughts unravel beneath the overwhelming psychic pressure pouring through the breached door, whispers intensifying into screams melting into laughter, all of them clawing at his mind with cold fingers that promised oblivion. The inner barricade buckled as fog tentacles hammered against it, their shifting limbs forming grotesque half-shapes, faces he recognized, comrades he'd lost, even fragments of himself. Every feature stretched and distorted as though mocked by whatever intelligence controlled this nightmare. Lieutenant Harrow stood before the failing barricade, shoulders squared despite the tremors shaking his body, rifle raised in futile defiance, and he shouted orders that were drowned by the deafening roar of the fog creature that now filled the outer chamber entirely, its colossal head pressing against the ceiling as a chorus of human and inhuman voices bellowed from within its shifting mass. The ground trembled like a wounded animal as cracks split across the floor, dust and debris raining from above, and the emergency lights flickered madly, painting the room in frantic pulses of red and white that made the fog appear alive in a dozen different ways, coiling, writhing, reaching. When the barricade finally shattered, exploding inward in a burst of splintered steel and concrete, time seemed to freeze. Harrow's eyes met Lorne's across the bunker, wide and fierce, filled with the unspoken command that had been building since the moment this horror began. Do it, end this, save whatever world remains beyond this cursed valley. The fog surged like a tidal wave, engulfing Harrow for an instant. His scream was choked off as a dozen tendrils pierced through his chest and dragged him into the shifting mass, his body dissolving into white mist that curled upward with the faces of all it had devoured. Lorne stumbled backward as the fog lunged toward him, tendrils forming serrated edges as they slashed through the air, shredding equipment, ripping open crates, extinguishing lights one by one until the only glow remaining came from the last flickering lantern beside him. His ears rang with the rising wail of the creature, a sound that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth itself, its roar carrying memories, guilt, sorrow, rage, every emotion it had harvested from soldiers living and dead. The bunker's ceiling groaned, steel beams twisting like bones under unimaginable pressure as dust cascaded in thick clouds. Lorne felt the concrete tremble beneath his boots, the whole mountain shuddering, as if attempting to shake free of the abomination clawing through its heart. Fog slammed into him, cold as death, wrapping around his arms, gripping his legs, constricting his lungs, until every breath felt like inhaling knives. He fell to one knee, choking, vision blurring as the faces within the fog pressed closer. Holt, Weller, men he'd laughed with, trained with, watched die, all whispering in unison. Join us, join us, join us. He pressed the detonator to his chest, hands shaking violently, mind fracturing beneath the onslaught of psychic voices. The creature's massive form pressed into the room now, filling it entirely, its colossal maw splitting open in a vertical tear of twisting vapor, jagged lines of white-hot energy crackling around its edges as it prepared to consume everything. Lorne forced himself upright, blood dripping from his nose, vision almost gone, heart hammering with a primal understanding that there was no world beyond this moment, just this choice. He looked at the lantern, its flame fluttering weakly, and whispered a single broken word. Enough. Then he pressed the detonator. For an instant, there was silence, absolute crushing silence. Then the world erupted. A blinding explosion tore through the bunker, igniting every shell, every crate of munitions, every combustible surface in a chain reaction that shook Ridgepoint Outpost to its core. Fire consumed the fog, shredding its form into shrieking currents of white, that twisted violently as they were driven backward into the valley below. The mountain screamed, a deep, resonant howl of stone fracturing and earth splitting, until the ridge collapsed inward, burying the pit, the bunker, the fog creature, and every trace of Company Delta beneath thousands of tons of rock. The valley fell silent for the first time in years. Days later, when reconnaissance drones scanned the region, they found only a crater where Ridgepoint had stood, a quiet wound in the earth, no bodies, no fog, nothing living. The official report deemed it a structural failure caused by an underground gas explosion, an explanation that satisfied no one who read it. But in the faint hum of wind that sometimes drifted through the crater at night, a whisper lingered, soft and hungry, carried from deep below the rubble. Not gone, not finished waiting. And somewhere far underground, beneath shattered stone and scorched earth, the fog stirred.